Welcome back. In this video we'll be looking at Flex Gateway and we'll look at what it is and also go through setup and installation. So firstly, what's Flex Gateway? Well, it's a tool that allows us to manage APIs that are implemented in any tech stack. So that could be APIs implemented in Mule or non-Mule, like Java API or Python API, and also APIs that are running in any sort of cloud or on-premise. So maybe they're running in AWS, maybe they're running in Azure, or maybe they're actually running on a customer's on-premise data center. Generally, most Mule developers will have used the Mule Gateway option before. This is where we use auto discovery to connect to the API manager and then do an actual implementation in Mule applications. But now we can use the Flex Gateway to implement API manager without any Mule implementations or proxy application. And here you can see an article or a documentation page giving a quick overview of what Flex Gateway is. So it tells us it's ultra-fast, lightweight API gateway designed to manage and secure APIs running anywhere. Built seamlessly to integrate with DevOps and CI/CD workflows. So we'll see that as a lot of the setup is done via command line and commands, and it mostly just runs in the background once it is up and running. And Flex Gateway delivers the performance required for the most demanding applications and microservices while providing enterprise security and manageability across any environment. Okay, so by using Flex Gateway, we can provide enterprise security because we can then apply our API manager policies and enforcing security. And we can also enable accessibility by making the API visible in Exchange. In terms of the architecture, this is quite a more detailed diagram than we need, but what we really need to know is here, this box here, customer hosted Flex Gateway runtime. This is the actual Flex Gateway sort of binary that will actually be running on one of our servers, perhaps on premise or in Azure or somewhere else. And in here it's made up of a few different components, but essentially this runtime is going to be what the consumer applications are going to call into. The runtime's also going to have the policies enabled and pulled down from the control plane from API Manager. And it's also going to be talking back into the control plane to keep its status up to date so that it's visible from the admin portal, and also for monitoring so the control plane can still access analytics and create the monitoring dashboards. And then the gateway, once it's received the request and validated the policies, etc., it'll send the messages out to the actual backend implementation of the APIs. So again, that could be a Python API running in Azure, for example. So really this is what Flex Gateway is and what it's doing. So with that in mind, we'll look at how can we actually set up and install Flex Gateway. So again, there is a documentation page which gives good details on how to get started and install Flex Gateway. It is actually quite easy to install and easy to follow. So to get started and install it, we can find it in the Runtime Manager tab of the platform. So you'll see here under Servers, Flex Gateways. We can go here and now you can already see there was one that I was just testing with before that's in a deleted state, but we won't be using that in this video. So to create a brand new one, we can go to Add Gateway, and then here we can see it supports multiple different Linux distributions, Docker, Kubernetes, or OpenShift. And you can see for each option, we've got the commands and instructions for exactly what we need to do to get it up and running. For now, I'll be using Docker just so I can run this Flex Gateway locally. So we'll just follow these instructions here. So the first command, docker pull MuleSoft Flex Gateway. So let's go to our terminal and run that. Okay, and that was quite fast because I've already pulled the latest version. Now step 2, we need to register the gateway. So this is actually going to open the connection to the control plane and register the gateway so the control plane has awareness of it. So I'm going to paste this, and here we need to just change the gateway name. So for this I'll use Flex Gateway Demo 2. And this shouldn't take too long. So it's going to complete the registration, and we'll also see it's created a registration.yaml file, which we'll look at in a moment. Now if we come back to our runtime manager and look at Flex Gateways, we can see it's created this new one here. So Flex Gateway Demo 2. Currently it's disconnected because the first command only does the registration. It doesn't actually start the gateway running. So if we go back to add gateway, and let's just complete the steps. So the final step is to actually run the gateway. So using Docker run again, we're going to run a different image this time. And before I do that, we'll just take a quick look at registration.yaml. So essentially all this contains is the connection details into the control plane. And if we look back at this architecture diagram, you can see the connections back into the control plane are using MTLS here. So secure WebSocket MTLS, secure WebSocket MTLS. So in order to enable MTLS, that means our Flex Gateway needs to have a certificate installed, and that's where this is captured here, as well as the other certificate and configuration information such as the URLs, region that we're setting this up in, etc. With that in mind, we'll now go ahead and run that command. So we've got docker run, and then defining the ports that it's going to be linking our local host to into the container. And in reality, you'd probably run this with the -d option when you run Docker in order to run this container in the background. But for the sake of this demo, we'll keep this container up in the forefront so we can see all the logs that it's spitting out. Okay, so the container is now up and running with Flex Gateway. And if we go back to Anypoint Management Center and click back, we can now see that our Flex Gateway Demo 2 is in a connected state. So what this means is we've registered our Flex Gateway and it's up and running and ready to start managing APIs. So now what we can do is we can go to API Manager, and we'll add a new API, and we'll use Flex Gateway and select our Flex Gateway Demo 2 that we've just started up. You can click next, and we're going to create a new API, and we'll just give it the name of typecode, and the asset type is HTTP API. In reality, this name would probably be something like Customers API or Orders API, something like that, to represent what the API actually does. In this case, we're just going to be using a sort of mock dummy API that's hosted at typecode. So we can see that here, JSON placeholder.typecode.com. And from here, you will be able to access things like users, and this is just static mock data. Well, this is the API we'll be using today. So we'll give it the name typecode and go next. Okay, and for the implementation URL, we will use this. So we're just going to pass in the base URL there, and we'll leave the base path. Well, we'll provide a base path as /typecode no slash is needed, and we can leave the remaining settings as is, and then click next and save and deploy. And when we do that, we'll see our logs start updating in the container as it receives the request to enable the API and redeploys to start managing the API. Okay, so we can see the APIs in API Manager now, and we've got the status as active. What we can do at this point is we can actually make a call to the API through Flex Gateway through localhost. So I've got the request set up ready here. You can see it's just a GET request on localhost /8081, And then we've got /typecode, as that is our base path we used, and then /users. So this extra path is going to be passed through into the implementation. So if we remember, this is our base path, and then we've got /users. So if we send that, we get our 200 back, and that static mock data that the example API comes back. So now the last step would be, we've got all our API up and running on Flex Gateway, and we can see it in API Manager. Now what we can also do is start to apply any API policies, just like we normally would with Mule Gateway. Just for the sake of example, I'll apply the basic authentication simple policy. And username and password, my browser's tried to autofill it, but we'll just use Flex Gateway demo, and I'll use the same password. Apply that. Okay, and again, it's the Flex Gateway's picked up that there's a new policy to be applied and redeployed that. So now if I call it, this request should fail. Yeah, so we've got a 401 unauthorized, and obviously because we've not passed in our credentials. So we can use basic auth, and I'm just going to paste in that username and password I set. And now when we send it, we get a 200 OK. So that's Flex Gateway.